Colonel Petty, who I saw at Cooper's Troopers. General. I'm sorry.
I just look too young to be a general, right? That's all. That's all.
Okay. This colonel just called you a kid.
That's okay. I am flattered.
He graduated 3 years after I retired.
Okay.
He is a kid.
I heard the talk. I was quite amazed to hear you talk about history and military command. You all have heard the thing that's etched on the National Archives building, and paraphrase, he who does not understand his own history is probably due to repeat it. And so I was quite amazed and impressed, and it's a privilege to have you here. General Petty is the author of 12 Battles Every American Should Know, and he maintains a website and a newsletter service, battledigest.com. Okay, and so he'll tell you about that, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Fred. Thank you. Great to be here. See some friendly faces, and that's always nice. But this is a great audience for this kind of stuff, because you guys understand history. Many of you have lived it and made it, and I'm honored actually to be here. So I'm going to start with a little background on me, and there's a couple reasons for that. Is one, it really informed what I'm doing, and so I want to explain that. And number two, I think sometimes when I do these talks, people like to talk about current events a little bit too, because I've only been retired for 5 years. The current Chief of Staff of the Army, Randy George, is a friend of mine, and so I still have some not really close contacts with leadership in the DoD, but I'm not that far removed from decision making and thought process in that complex building. So let me do a little background first, and then I'll tell you about the historical approach I take, which I think is different, unique, and you guys will find it interesting. So I graduated from West Point in '87. Yes, I'm young. I'm just about to be 59. And I did a traditional, I branched, well, here, funny story here. I went to Ranger School as a cadet, and you know, I was feeling pretty frisky. I was on top of the world, you know, coming back as a cadet to the Corps of Cadets as a Ranger. You know, that's a lot of street cred. But Ranger School is interesting for me because as much as I found it challenging and exciting and fulfilling, I realized pretty quickly that, you know, my Ranger instructor captains looked like they were 80-year-old men. And I'm thinking, my God, do I want to do this for 20 years?
You were 80.
Yes, yes, you were. I mean, you looked like it to me. So the funny thing is, I'm doing my patrols and all that great stuff you do in Ranger School, and hungry and tired and dirty, and I kept jumping on the back of these helicopters. And lo and behold, you know, we'd traversed all night in the dark, you know, through the tough terrain to move like 10 kilometers. These helicopters are picking us up and moving us 10 kilometers in like, you know, a minute. And the pilots, they smelled like soap and they looked well fed. So the light bulb went off. Yeah, the light bulb went on in my head, and I thought, maybe aviation is where I belong. So actually they made a little mistake by sending me to Ranger School as a cadet, because then I branched aviation. So I flew Hueys. A lot of you guys are very familiar with Hueys. I know you are. And that was a great machine. You know, I spent a lot of time, a lot of years flying the Huey, the Harley Davidson of Army aircraft. And you know, I did normal assignments. I did, you know, platoon leader, company commander. Interestingly enough, the Cold War was ending as I graduated and went through flight school. And so I actually got off active duty. It's a weird story of my career progression. I got off active duty because the world looked really boring all of a sudden in 1991, before Desert Storm. And I just thought, well, okay, we're not going to have any wars anytime soon, so I'm going to try and be a civilian for a while. So I did that. I was in the IRR. You familiar with the IRR, Individual Ready Reserve? So I did that for a year, but then I really missed it. I really missed the Army. I missed aviation. Lo and behold, Buckley Air Force Base houses a Army Aviation Battalion. At that time they had Hueys and Cobras, and I think they had a couple Little Birds back then still on the tarmac. So I joined the Guard, and I did traditional Guard stuff for about 7 years as I started a business in Denver and tried to feed my family, my growing family. I have 4 boys. My youngest is 29, my oldest is 34. One of them is active duty officer in the Coast Guard, just relinquished command of a cutter in the Gulf. And my third son is an Army captain who branched infantry out of West Point, and he went cyber. He branch transferred cyber, which many of you know, that emerging field is really going to be a future warfighting domain of great importance. So I got my pulse on the active duty Coast Guard, I got my pulse on the active duty Army, and it's interesting to watch them and watch them do their thing. So I'm trying to feed my growing family, 4 boys, in 5 years. And you know, things are going okay, and I'm doing traditional Guard stuff. You guys know, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer, company command, battalion, you know, assistant 3, battalion 3, and I'm doing all this good stuff. And then as my business is faltering a little bit, 7 years down the road, I mean, it's fine, no bankruptcy or anything, they offer me a full-time job. So I take a full-time job out at Buckley, and I'm now in track to be an instructor pilot and do all the things that a lot of commissioned officers never get a chance to do. And so I grabbed that and ran with it. And you know, full-time Guard is still Guard. And I won't bore you with all the history, but you know, every career, you guys know, every career has a couple of really life-altering or really personal growth opportunities in it, whether it's a war or some challenging assignment. And I had a few. I'll share one with you. So I was fortunate enough to be the commander of that aviation battalion when the Iraq War was kicking off. And so just by sheer luck and timing, as you know, this plays out every day, I'm the guy taking that battalion to war. This was in 2005. We deployed in 2006. And this is a National Guard battalion built from 6 different states with Blackhawks and Chinooks and medevac Blackhawks, all put together with 6 primary states, and then an extra medevac company from 2 other states, Florida and Arkansas, that was folded in as we were deploying. And that was a challenging time. You know, we were going into Iraq in 2006. This is when Iraq was now really gearing up in the surge. Aircraft were getting shot down. I personally lost 2 helicopters shot down, 1 destroyed by mortar fire and rocket fire. And I brought everyone home, not because of me, because this team of guardsmen was just amazing, incredible, really experienced aviators, as you guys probably know well. And we were basically, you've heard of Stanley McChrystal, right? And the Special Operations Task Force in Iraq. We became his extension as an air assault unit doing massive air assaults at night. That's the green picture on the little pamphlet there. And this was a wild ride. I mean, different kind of war than many of you have studied and some of you have lived, but an intense war environment at that point. I mean, I just want you to picture this National Guard battalion, you know, this little battalion that could, and it is running, you know, 5 Chinooks, 4 Blackhawks, a couple Apaches joining, you know, the AC-130 gunship overhead every night on the objective with the fighters up in the stack. We're doing this every 3 nights for a year. Massive, massive energy into this thing. So it was a formative experience for me. And really the reason I bring that up is, as a battalion commander, I get a chance to see the Army at war, and you know, working with the Joint Force and the Air Force and the Marines and the Special Ops Command. And it was just a time of growth for me, just seeing the Army work at war, something, you know, many of us don't get a chance to see. So that success in Iraq led to some other things. This battalion got awards and praise from the highest levels of the Pentagon. That led to some good opportunities. Brigade command, then I'm just deploying units back and forth between Afghanistan and Iraq for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden I get offered a general officer gig. So I'm getting ready to retire. I'm doing the out processing at Fort Carson. literally, out processing at Fort Carson. I've got 20 years. The Guard is a pyramid where, you know, you can't keep all the colonels because the young guys can't move up. And so it's not like the active duty military where you get a number, you're on a list, boom, you're just thrown out into the world. You know, it's a smaller pyramid, so you gotta keep moving a little bit. So I'm retiring. Before that, I'm the Chief of Staff of the Guard. So I'm actually running the Guard in Colorado for the Adjutant General. So the 830 full-time employees, 30-odd facilities around the state that you guys are familiar with. So that was an interesting time, actually, seeing how the Guard operates from that business perspective. Anyway, so I'm getting ready to retire, literally out processing. I get a call from General Grass, who was the Guard's 4-star. He was on the Joint Chiefs even. And he said, Petty, you ready? You want to pin on a star? I said, okay, sir. What do you got in mind? And he says, I'm going to send you to Bosnia. You're going to be the NATO commander in Bosnia for a year. It's like, sure, sounds exciting. So let me reverse track here and get ready for that exciting assignment. So I went to Bosnia. Why do I bring that up? Because I got to see NATO. I got to see NATO function. Not as a warfighting element, but I got to see the headquarters, how it works with other nations. I had at least 8 nationalities on my staff, from the Hungarians to the Turkish. And it was just interesting to see that and see how NATO operates, and also see how that Balkan Peninsula is a very strange historic place to be. And that led to some other good things too. I worked at the Guard Bureau in DC and got to see how the Guard interacts with the Pentagon and that decision making and knife fighting for resources and stuff that constantly goes on. And then I got put on the Army staff. So I'm not the Guard guy now. I'm working for the Army G3, General Anderson at the time. And I am figuring out, you know, working on programs to help become the largest arms dealer in the world. You know, interesting things like that happen in the Pentagon for Afghanistan, and figuring out how to counter UAS threats and drones that are hitting FOBs in Afghanistan and all that kind of stuff. But that assignment taught me how the DoD resources and thinks and makes decisions, and that was just fascinating. That's where I got to know all these good guys like Randy George, who's the Chief of Staff of the Army now. And then my last assignment was at Northcom, right here in our backyard at Peterson, where I was the Deputy Director of Operations. So I got to manage missile defense when Kim Jong-un was getting really carried away in the beginning, back in, this is probably 15, 16 or 16, 17. And so I got to work in a combatant command and see that level. So I mean, I really feel fortunate in this weird career of being a active duty West Point graduate, an IRR soldier, a traditional guardsman, and a full-time guardsman, and ending my career as an active duty general doing these assignments. It was just a fascinating trip through DoD actually, and war fighting and the whole bit. So I really feel blessed about that. And I bring all that up too, in case you want to think about some current events and things you want to talk about. Now, back to my real point. Back to my real point. Before I do, there's one thing I want to share with you. I may have shared it with you guys at Cooper's Troopers, but everyone has a 15 minutes of fame story, right? So mine was Balloon Boy. Remember Balloon Boy? So I'm getting some nods. Okay, this is October of '09, I think it was October of '09, when that Fort Collins family said their 6-year-old son Falcon was released in a strange looking Mylar balloon that sailed east. Well, I was the Black Hawk that responded to that. And this is the ingenuity of the US soldier. So here we are. I'm kind of the ready crew, I guess. It's like, okay, we're gonna respond to a balloon floating over Denver with a 6-year-old boy in it. Okay, we have a helicopter and a crew. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna mount a hoist in this thing, and we're gonna have a medic on board and very competent with the hoist operation and lowering in the hoist. And we are gonna fly to this balloon, we're gonna lower the hoist, and we're gonna rescue the 6-year-old kid, right? I mean, any soldier is gonna do this, we'll figure it out. So we chased Balloon Boy, the balloon, over DIA, shut down the entire DIA. I was a moving TFR. which most people will never have that claim to fame. TFR for you non-aviators is a temporary flight restriction. So it literally, we floated this TFR so no aircraft can go in it. I mean, it's a very highly restrictive FAA airspace control measure. And we shut down the entire DIA airspace. And flights were stopped dead as we're drifting across DIA in my little Black Hawk. And lo and behold, you guys know how the story ends. You know, the balloon drifts down, the cops come, we're circling, and they find no kid on board, which is like, oh, great. Okay, this kid's still alive. And then we're thinking, oh no, this kid fell out of the balloon somewhere between Fort Collins and DIA. So now our elation turns into, oh crap, we're gonna search for a dead body now. So we get back up and we're flying the route that the balloon took. So long story short, he turns out to be alive, and the story's a happy ending. But that was one of my 15 minutes of fame. It was a fun little trivia of, because Balloon Boy was a worldwide story. That was not a Colorado story. If you guys remember, that was a worldwide story. Yeah, Rick.
When did the kid leave the balloon?
He didn't. He never got in the balloon. That was the deception that the Heaney, I think it was the Heaney family, I think there was a lot of rumor about they were trying to create this social media thing and fame and all this stuff. It backfired on them. But the governor pardoned them. It was all fine. Now, back to my point. During my 31 years in uniform, I was one of those officers that I really believed in military history. I believed in the lessons of military history. I was always disappointed that the Army, in my case, it's an Army-centric kind of viewpoint at this point. I was just disappointed that we didn't stress history more. Back when I was a cadet at West Point, we had to take a full year of what we call military art, which, as most of you know, is really the how you tie it all together in strategy and campaigns and tactics, and studying historical vignettes to learn the lessons. But that was it. The service schools, as you grow up in the Army at least, don't cover a lot of military history. I mean, we got some of it in Command and General Staff. We got some at the War College, which, you know, you have to go to War College to be a general. And it's nice, but it's insufficient. It's not near enough. I was always disappointed. But along the way, I was one of those officers that took it seriously. And so I did what we called Officer Professional Development, which is now generically called LDP, Leadership Development Programs. I just taught one 2 days ago at the Colorado National Guard. It was great. We talked about Pearl Harbor, and we had a nice interest, so it's nice. Maybe it's coming back a little bit. But I'd actually prepare these classes for my soldiers, even when I was a young platoon leader. Now, it took a lot of work. I could only do this maybe twice a year, maybe once a quarter sometimes, because it took a lot of work. You know, imagine doing all the research and putting together slides. And when I started, believe me, the slides were the grease pencil on you remember? Remember that thing? The little, I forget even what they call it. The mimeograph, or the plastic thing that's shown up on the screen. Remember those? The teachers all had them when we were kids. Anyway, so I'm doing all this stuff, and I'm thinking to myself the whole time, for 31 years basically, I'm going, scratching my head when I had hair, thinking, why didn't the Army give us a tool? There's got to be an easier way. This is ridiculous. I care about this. I think it's really important, but it takes a lot of work. So that was really the origin story for Battle Digest. My historical project is I'm going to solve the Army's problem. The thing I wish I would have had even as a young lieutenant to help impart lessons of military history. By the way, you guys know this. If you would have asked an Army captain like 40 years ago, so Captain, why do you think Napoleon lost at Waterloo? What do you think his mistakes were? Or what were Wellington's things that he did well? Or why did Grant manage to pull off his victory at Shiloh after day one? You could ask an Army captain that, I swear, 40 years ago, and he'd go, well, sir, here's some thoughts on that. Now you ask an Army captain those two questions, and he's going to go, I don't know, sir. I have no idea. I mean, it's really changed. I'm telling you guys, it's really changed, and I'm not happy about it. I can only do my little part by giving them a tool, which I'm trying to do. So that was the need, and that has driven me for a long time. And that really morphed into this idea of Battle Digest. I'm going to hand these out. I would like these back, if you don't mind. I've got some books, which I'll talk about later. Yeah, thanks, Gary. But I want you to take a look at the format of this. We're not really going to spend a lot of time talking about the Battle of Fredericksburg. We can, because it's another fascinating conflict in the Civil War. And in my opinion, probably the biggest blunder by a general officer in the Civil War, with Burnside's deadly frontal assaults on Lee's defensive positions on Marye's Heights. But I want you to look at the format. I've tried to make this so simple, so logical. All the Battle Digest issues are this way. They're 3,000 words. They all follow a standard format. They even have discussion questions on the back. I mean, I can't make it any easier than this. So, you know, in 30 minutes, you really can understand what drove the conflict, what each side was planning and thinking. And that's really the end result, is Battle Digest. But as I went through this process, and I've been thinking about it for so many years, I'm going, you know, I'm not a historian. And I think that's kind of the important point here. I'm not a historian. Historians are great. I've worked with some of them. Flint Whitlock has helped me write a couple of these, to be quite frank. I mean, I work with historians. I like their stuff. But I think differently than a historian. I'm a military officer looking at the continuities and the threads of warfare. I'm trying to teach people how to think about warfare. Historians love the details and the exciting stories of heroics and all that. I'll sprinkle a few of those in to make it a good story, but I'm interested in this pattern, the pattern that warfare repeats very predictable, very understandable patterns, which creates really good lessons for future conflicts that are every bit as relevant today as they were on the fields of Gettysburg. And I'm a real believer in that. So if you think about the way I look at war, I look at it this way. And to a military strategist, this is like, okay, no kidding, Petty, you're not that brilliant. But most of the world doesn't think this way. So I look at it this way. Everything starts with a strategic context. Everything starts with this strategic backdrop of political leadership, the geopolitics of the time, you know, what's driving the nation or the belligerent to do the things that they're doing. That creates a national or a theater strategy, right? Again, kind of common sense, but writers don't think this way. Historians don't think this way. Military officers think this way. So that drives a strategy, basically a national strategy or a theater strategy. And of course, that strategy drives a campaign plan. And that campaign plan, of course, is informed and connected to those other things. And that campaign plan results in battles, right? And the battles are these great contests of commanders adapting and creating advantage and taking advantage of enemy weakness and all that stuff. But it's this predictable pattern of warfare that churns out these principles, these lessons, and these tenets that I think are immutable and timeless. And that's really what I try to capture in Battle Digest. So really, it's more how to think about war. So when I think about Pearl Harbor, you know, I just talked about Pearl Harbor the other day to this audience of officers, thank goodness, you know, and senior NCOs. And when I talk about Pearl Harbor, well, when the historians talk about Pearl Harbor, they talk about an incredible surprise attack and this great American heroic actions on the ground, because, you know, guys are literally running to their airplanes in their underwear to try to take down Japanese aircraft. But when I look at Pearl Harbor, I look at, okay, what was happening in Japan? Why on earth would the Japanese plan an attack on Pearl Harbor? So I start with, you know, what's going on in Japan that's driving this imperialistic mindset and pushing them into a strategy of, we need resources to feed our ambitions for our imperial empire. We need resources because we have zero oil in Japan, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to keep the United States Navy out of our neighborhood for a while till we can get strong enough to build a defensive perimeter. And that drives a campaign, essentially, which is Pearl Harbor. And the Pearl Harbor campaign is basically The assumption is, and I know I'm not really here to talk about Pearl Harbor, but my point is how this builds, but the assumption in Japan is the U.S. will fight a limited war. We think we can strike, defeat them enough that they will have a limited war approach, and we can hold them off till we're strong enough to build our defensive perimeter. Makes sense, right? But that limited war didn't work for them, for America, so it was a terrible assumption in their strategic planning. And that led to the Pearl Harbor strike and all that kind of stuff. So again, my point is not the detail of Pearl Harbor, it's all flowing from some of the geopolitical and political climate in Japan to create a strategy, to create a campaign, to create the tactical action at Pearl Harbor. You got to learn about the Pearl Harbor, how the U.S. responded, and then the lessons learned. The lessons learned, strategic miscalculation by Japan on that limited war versus America going, hell, we're going to kick their butts till they're smoldering ruins. You know, that was a bad assumption in their strategy. Anyway, you get the point. Lots of great lessons from these battles. If you take a look at this format, you'll see Fredericksburg. Some of you are pretty familiar with the Battle of Fredericksburg in your Civil War history. So Fredericksburg, again, there are national level things going on with Lincoln and the frustration with his generals and the fact that that McClellan, right after the success of Antietam, expelling Lee's army from the north, Lincoln's frustrated. He's like, I need offensive action. I'm going to replace McClellan with Burnside. And so this is driving Burnside to say, okay, I can read the tea leaves. I need to hurry up and do something to keep Lincoln happy. So he plans a quick campaign to open up the route to Richmond, which was the goal of the Eastern struggle in most of the Civil War. Open up a route to Richmond. And so he has a great opportunity. He's got Lee out of position. Lee's army's out of position. So Burnside creates this good, solid campaign plan, but he forgets something really important. His entire campaign relies on pontoon bridges that are coming from Washington. And, to this day, you got to scratch your head and go, okay, if your entire campaign relies on bridging material and engineers, why wouldn't you make that a precondition for like movement or, a decision point in the plan? Well, Burnside didn't. So he gathers his army, and I'm not going to go all the details of Fredericksburg, but he gathers his army, and he gets to the edge of the river, the Rappahannock River. He's looking at Fredericksburg. Lee's only got 500 soldiers defending the entire town, and Burnside's got him way outmanned, but they don't cross the river. And then it rains, and then the rivers swell, and now they're waiting for bridges for 5 days while Lee's assembling his army, building his defensive terrain, Mary's Heights. You've heard of Mary's Heights. And Burnside doesn't recalibrate, doesn't have the mental flexibility as a commander to say, conditions have changed drastically from what I planned for. Let's reevaluate. He doesn't. He tries a couple little things around the flanks and nothing is significant. And then he just goes in his frontal assault mode against Lee's defenses on Mary's Heights. And it's a disaster. It's a predictable disaster, which is why I love Fredericksburg. It's like, how could a general think this way, that that's going to work out positively? Now, Burnside wasn't qualified to be a general at this level, and he even admitted it before the campaign, so he proved himself right. But there's great lessons. If you look at the lessons learned page, you guys have a pamphlet. Look at the lessons learned page if you haven't. I mean, this is the key to Battle Digest, is so what? So what? Okay, Fredericksburg is interesting. Yes, Burnside's blunder, but so what? It's about the lessons of war that are timeless, predictable, repeatable, and that's why I'm fascinated by it. Yes?
Have you done one yet on the Ukrainian?
I haven't.
To me, that
Yes.
changed tremendously.
And I think we should talk about Ukraine if you guys want to at the end, because I've got as much time as you want. But this is the essence of Battle Digest. It is how to think about war. In 30 minutes, I think I can give you all of the key aspects of the battle thread it perfectly in history from that strategic context down to the tactical action in 30 minutes. You read it and go, oh, okay. I totally, I mean, I'm not going to get into all the detail that a Flint Whitlock would, but I'm going to give you in 30 minutes, like, okay, I can talk about Fredericksburg. I know some of the key lessons and the so what of Fredericksburg. That's Battle Digest. So I'm doing my part. I'm trying to do my part. So the military is a tough place to market to, believe it or not. So I have some small inroads, but you know, most of my customers are guys like you. They love history. They see the value of this. Isn't it weird how as you get older, you see the value of history more and more? It's just strange. If we only had that wisdom when we were 20, we would have been so much better off, especially our military officers, by the way. So, so that's it. Now, that morphed into a book because I want to attack this problem from a couple of different angles. This is, as I started producing these, I've got like 30 battles right now in print. Most of my customers are subscribers, so they actually go to battledigest.com. They subscribe. I send them one every quarter, and it's like their wives tell me it's like Christmas morning for their husband. When Battle Digest arrives, they're like, oh yeah, I get to learn a new battle. So I really like that. But I figured, you know, I got this great content. A lot of people are more comfortable with books, you know, because this is unusual, right? In the marketplace, it's kind of a trifold brochure. What's that? But everyone understands a book. So I took 12 battles that I thought every American really should know this stuff. I'm personally disappointed in my fellow Americans. I know this sounds a little weird, but I'm just disappointed we've lost history. We've lost it. These kids are not understanding history. They don't care because they're not being taught history. So this, I mean, you know, I write at that appropriate level for high schoolers even. You know, you guys know about writing. You don't write for a PhD student. You write for your average American. So these are written that anybody can understand them if you're, you know, over age 10, and you're going to get something out of it. So this is my other little crusade, is every American should know this stuff. You know, why did I pick these battles? Because for different reasons, actually. Quite frankly, because I get challenged on this all the time, which I love the discussion. You know, why only those 12? Why didn't you include this one or this one? Which is great discussion. But some of these are turning points in warfare in American history, like Pearl Harbor or like Midway. Some of them are things that, just because you're an American, you should know this. I mean, Custer at Little Bighorn, yeah, it didn't turn the tide of the Indian Wars. It definitely accelerated the decline of, you know, that portion of the Indian Wars, because again, you piss off Americans, things happen. It's amazing in history. But that's part of our cultural history. I mean, you should know what happened to Custer at Little Bighorn and why. And so that's why there's a couple battles like that in there. So this is available too. I mean, you know, if you're interested. I made the cardinal mistake of an author, though. This is my last like 11 books on the shelf, which historians would shame me for this. But I sell books when I go talk, and it's great, and I'm really happy with the results. But I failed to realize that during the holiday season, the shipping delays got me. So I got caught unprepared. I hate to say that as a former military officer. But so I only have 11 books. So first come, first serve. I'll sign them for you. But this is my attempt to help in our long struggle of regaining American history. I've made it easy. They're concise, and for you guys now, you know there's a real logical flow to how to think about war, not just as a trivia thing, but it's all lessons, and it all makes patterns and really important stuff to understand. So that's my spiel. It's been a great run. I've really enjoyed it. I'm a happy granddad now. I'm entering that next phase of life I got 10 grandkids. I know. Well, 4 boys in 5 years. They're all getting busy. So I got number 11 on the way. So I'm entering a new phase of life. So I'm not really doing this for money. I'm honest about that. I don't care about the money. I'm happy, but it's got to be done. You guys read I saw in the Wall Street Journal about 2 months ago, but it really grabbed me. So that's my retirement thing. coffee, Wall Street Journal in the morning, staring at my beautiful wife across the table. That's a nice way to start your day. But in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article that really hit home with me, because we know how bad like test scores are in English proficiency, math proficiency. Well, guess what is at the bottom of all of them? History and civics. These kids are just not learning history like we even learned. I mean, when I went to Bosnia, I realized I had a blind spot. I had to read a lot to get prepared for Bosnia, because we never studied a lot of Southeastern Europe history, right? I mean, we just didn't. But man, we studied some of this stuff. We did. So it's gone. And I don't know how we bring it back, but maybe I can get a bunch of these out there. Okay, so let's transition to Q&A, discussion. Anything you want to talk about? Yes, sir.
What are the 12 letters?
Okay, I'll read them to you real quick. Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, Yorktown, Alamo, again, kind of that cultural history side. Little Bighorn, Shiloh. Shiloh. You could talk all day about Shiloh. I didn't know how critical that was until I really did the research. Antietam, Gettysburg, Pearl Harbor, Midway, D-Day, and Desert Storm. Pretty good span of history. Yeah, I know. What did I leave out? No. Okay, yes, sir.
I was just
I know.
curious if you are aware of the demographics who subscribe to the battle.
I am.
Is it
Guess who it is? Guys like you. It is totally guys like you. Some younger military officers who have discovered it. You know, I'm a one-man show. I don't really have a marketing budget. I do some Facebook stuff, but honestly, it's guys like you, because you like history and you believe in this stuff, and you.
So no business leaders or corporate leaders?
No. I'd like to get into a little bit more of that, but frankly, I don't want to change my approach too much to make it the corporate thing, because it's really a military and history thing. So like I said, it's not really about the money, so I'm not too keen on that. We'll see. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you said you won't read the Wall Street Journal, but
Yeah.
you have to read it today.
I usually get it a day late because they could never deliver it in time.
A great article, interview with Professor Ray from Hillsdale College, Professor of Military History, talking about proxy wars.
I can't wait to read that.
You'll enjoy
I can't wait to read that tomorrow.
Yeah, it's a great article.
Yeah.
And it talks about the relationship with us and Ukraine, Israel.
Yeah.
And it especially goes back to ancient history, military history, when Athens invaded Syracuse,
Uh-huh.
so Sicily, and the Spartans opposed that by proxy by sending a general over there that
Uh-huh.
repelled the Athenians.
Yeah.
It's great.
I can't wait to read it. I'll definitely find it tomorrow. Yes, sir.
So let's shift to Ukraine.
Yes.
What, from your interpretation, applying your analysis approach,
Okay.
what was the strategy of the Russians? What was their overall plan? And why hasn't it worked?
Well, okay, big question, but let me throw out some ideas. So, first of all, you have to understand Vladimir Putin. And I'm not a Putin expert, but I read like you guys, and to me, Putin is a imperialist leader of Russia who wants to reverse decades of de-Stalinization. I mean, that's really what he wants to do. He wants the greater glory for Russia. He plays into the Orthodox faith, and that's his worldview. So, despite the territorial dispute of Ukraine itself, you can make arguments about when was Ukraine ever not Russia, etc., and there's a long history there. But his initial strategy, you can tell immediately, was flawed. I mean, that much was obvious, right, in the beginning phases of the war. So Putin, imagine him surrounded by his yes men, and he thinks his military is a daunting machine, because that's what he gets fed all the time from his circle of yes men. And so he really thinks he can just lightning blast into Kiev, topple the government, and do enough propaganda and coercion on the population, and he's got it. I mean, I'm convinced that was his assumption in his campaign plan. Turned out to be very bad assumptions, as they often are. It really boggles my mind how bad some of the assumptions are of leaders going into war. But that was a bad one, and it proved itself in the field. And then he retrenched, retreated, and said, well, I'll just carve off this part for now, and we'll see how that goes. And that's still playing out.
What are the lessons that we need to learn from how this war is being fought?
Well, lots of tactical lessons. I mean, you can see the learning cycle going on between artillery, counter battery fire, UAS, counter UAS, the drones. I mean, those lessons are happening like monthly, and that's exciting to watch. But it's also a lesson that we learned in the end of the Civil War and in World War I. You know, trench warfare. You know, once the two sides are stabilized and have time to fortify and build up, you know, Ukraine has got a tough road ahead if they think they're going to move through those defense in-depth positions that the Russians have built. Now, somebody asked me just last night at dinner, he said, well, could America break that stalemate? And I said, well, yeah, we could break that stalemate, but it would be massive Air Force attacks, creating a breach, that we would have reserve forces far enough back, you know, and our counter battery fire, and, you know, we could do that. We could breach that. But the Ukrainians just don't have that kind of logistics trail and massive amounts of armor and stuff like that. So are they going to breach it? I mean, I don't have any special intel or anything like that, but right now I'm doubtful. Yes, sir.
Don't you think that the Ukrainian attack was sort of precipitated by the Crimea, the ease in which the Russians took over Crimea?
So, yes, I do think that definitely fed their assumptions on further acquisition of territory. Yep. Yeah, that was, you could look back and say that was a mistake, letting them do that so easily. Yeah.
Are you, do you know General King personally?
No, I don't.
General King's got a blog. His foundation's got a blog. Are you familiar with that blog?
I don't think so.
It will, yeah, it's
about Ukraine?
You can find out daily what the hell's going on over
Institute of
there.
Study of War.
What?
Institute of the Study
That's
of War.
it, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah, I
staying
tune
very
into
current.
that, just about 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah, well,
to see what's going on.
you guys probably know more than I do. I'm just looking at this from afar. Yes, sir.
I want to go back to your book.
Yeah.
You chose those battles. Was it because of the lessons learned in them?
Some of it was lessons learned, but really I just took a step back and said, you know, if I was going to select battles, and you know, part of the fun debate is, okay, why didn't you include this, or why did you include that? But so that's good in itself. But why I selected them, because I studied them, I saw their value, and as I could pick the ones that I studied, it's like if I was going to create from Lexington to Desert Storm, which covers a nice period of time for America, what do I think every American should at least be familiar with? You know, if you're an American, you should know what happened at Antietam. That was a major, America's bloodiest day. Still is America's bloodiest day. You should know some of this stuff. That's all.
Yeah, I grew up I didn't grow up, I had assignments in Virginia, and my 12-year-old son was fanatic about the Civil War. So we visited Antietam and Gettysburg and Shiloh and everything, and we lived on the what was it, the first battle, Manassas. We lived on the creek.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's great. When you can tour those battlefields and spend some time, it's just priceless. Yes, sir.
Speaking of Fredericksburg in '62, so didn't Grant, after Fredericksburg, a year and a half later, you basically studied Burnside and tried to not make the same mistake?
I would hope anyone would say, let's not make the same mistake. Yeah, Grant was, yes, and I don't mean to judo your question, but when I think of Grant and learning, I think of Shiloh. I do.
Yeah, that's true.
Because really that was his real baptism under fire. And I think that shaped Grant going forward, is Shiloh, and the fact that we can destroy the Confederates with enough manpower and enough, you know, arms and supplies. Whereas Sherman took another lesson from Shiloh, which is, I do not like all this carnage. It's unnecessary. I'm going to go to the heart of the South and make them not want to fight anymore. Different lessons from Shiloh for those two.
That was under the direction of Grant.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But Grant, and again, not to get too far from your question, I don't know if Grant, I don't know if he studied Burnside, but I hope he did. Yeah.
But he definitely took lessons.
Yes, he did. Yes. Yes, sir.
Are you sure those were lessons learned, or were they lessons that should have been learned?
Yeah, great point. There's a lot of lessons that should have been learned. And again, part of my drive in this is if our military officers aren't even thinking in this terminology and thinking about these lessons, they're going to make mistakes that will cost blood. They will cost blood, and it bothers me.
In talking about our future leaders, do you have the ability as an academy graduate to go back and do a symposium with those students?
Yeah, I'm going to take.
Or go back to CSU with,
Yeah.
with the ROTC programs or CU, the top, and then out of that it will.
Yes, that's where I want to go. And when I first approached West Point, I've gone to some of these military colleges and like the CGSC, the Command and General Staff College. The funny thing is, they've already got their curriculum. They've invested years in developing their curriculum, so they feel pretty complacent. For lack of a better word, they feel pretty complacent. So the reaction I got from the West Point colonel that runs the Department of History, this is 4 years ago, was, "Hey, Chris, he said, hey, sir. Hey, sir, these are great battles. I love your format. This is awesome. But when I look at your footnotes, your endnotes here, we have all these books on the shelf." I'm thinking, so this is going to be an uphill fight. So, cadets aren't reading all that stuff, but they'll read this. They'll read this. And that's what they're missing. The new generation doesn't want the 300-page book. They really do want this. But that's going to take some time. Now, I'm going to take advantage of, my son is actually going to teach at West Point next year. So I'll be mounting my own guerrilla campaign effectively as I go visit him more often. Yes, sir.
So tactically, teaching soldiers in the cities, your book and pamphlets are great.
Yeah.
So how do we teach politicians
Oof.
strategic global strategy?
$64,000 question right there.
I don't think,
Yeah.
well, the average politician, both sides,
Yeah.
has no clue about military history
No.
or
No.
how we got to where we are today.
No, they don't. And it's a shame, and yes, that's changed over the last 60, 70 years for sure, but what do you do? It's a republic form of democracy, and what do you do? Some of these people getting elected, I'm just like, oh my God. But that's the way the system works. It'd be nice if we could teach a class to the incoming freshmen, right?
I don't think it was that way 50 years ago.
Oh, I don't think it was either. You know why? You were taught in school some of these basics. You were taught in school. They're not being taught. The framing, if you went into a world history class in college right now on a typical university, the entire frame would be oppressors versus oppressed. And it's like the struggle of the oppressed versus the oppressor throughout history. It's not about real politic and things that we learned about. It's changed. It's a shame. Yes?
Well, following on to John's question back to proxy war in Ukraine, what's the consequence, do you think, if our politicians lose the will to continue supporting our effort in Ukraine?
Well, I think it either stalemates, but because both sides have lost the logistical resources, actually, both sides. Russia actually, I read an article that Russia's going back to all of their arms exporters, the people they've exported to, and asking for critical parts back.
Yeah.
Now, that tells you something right there. That's a big step.
Well,
But to answer the question, I think, if I was a betting man on the outcome of the Ukraine war, it would be pretty much a stalemate where it is now. I hope that's not the case, but I think it's going to stalemate, and I think Ukraine's going to lose 20% of the territory. That would be my bet right now. I hope that doesn't play out. But I just don't see either side with the logistical resources and the manpower resources to do the big breakthrough, the big envelopment. I just don't see it.
But the danger of regional escalation and NATO being drawn in.
Hard to say. With this administration, I don't think NATO will be drawn in. I don't think this administration wants to fight anywhere at any time.
I think it's interesting that since Congress has started to falter a little bit on supplying Ukraine with money and
Yeah.
military weapons, the Europeans, the people in the back door, or,
Yeah.
right next
Yep.
door, I should say,
Yeah,
are starting to step up and send more money and weapons to Ukraine.
right. I think that's a good thing.
Well, I think it's
Yeah.
an absolute great thing. But
Yeah.
They're the ones in danger.
Right.
If Russia wins.
Right.
They're the ones that read history.
That's right.
Visiting the Balkan countries,
Yeah.
even over there, this was several years ago, about the time you were retired.
Mm-hmm.
They are very concerned because the Russians moved so many Russians into their country
Yeah.
that almost half of their population are Russians.
Yeah.
Estonia, Latvia. And that-
There's a lot of fear in in the about
and they are
Russian.
very much afraid
Yep.
that the Russians will do the same thing that
Yep.
they did in eastern
Yeah.
Ukraine.
I think the fear. I think the fear is justified. I do.
There are NATO countries.
Right. Right. There are many of them there. I think the fear is justified. I think, although this has to be a wake-up call for Putin. I mean, even he has to realize that he's exhausted and he's destroying his manpower and he doesn't have the resources. So we'll see. We'll see how this plays out. What else? I know we had a couple more questions. Yes, sir.
Just one thing of interest, back in the late 70s, I was at Armed Forces Staff College where we were being taught how to do joint exercises.
Yep.
And how we could work with the Navy and everything. And one of the major exercises was kind of, we'll call it invasion, but incursion into Lebanon. And during initial phases, you have to rely on the Navy
Mm-hmm.
for all your air support and being able to control the skies. Well, the thing which occurred time and again was as soon as there was a threat against the carriers, a perceived threat, the whole fleet disappeared
Mm-hmm.
because you're circled wagons. You have
Yeah.
to protect the $1 billion, whatever you got.
Right.
That's why long-range weapons are
Yeah.
important.
Well, now with missiles and everything.
Yeah.
It really, to me, is shaken up very much this idea of a major threat, or again, billions and more, a much more, aircraft carrier.
Right. Yeah, it's a great point. I think about the aircraft carrier, and you guys understand the prominent role it played in the Pacific theater. I mean, it was decisive. It was the decisive weapons platform for the Pacific War, besides, the island hopping campaign. What's the carrier, we look at China right now. The emerging global threat for America is China, clearly. And I always ask myself, okay, so I hope our planners are trying to figure out what is the aircraft carrier of that conflict. It may be the aircraft carrier, but I'm not sure it is. But what's that critical weapons platform that must be produced and defended? Maybe it is the attack submarine. It could be, and we still have a little advantage there. But that's the way our planners need to think. World War II taught us that lesson, that the carriers were decisive platforms. What's the next decisive platform?
What could they be again because of long-range weapons that
Yeah.
the Chinese have? As Mike said, first thing the Navy's going to do is pull their huge assets
Right,
out of the danger zone, if you will.
Right.
So we have to have the same type of long-range weapon.
right. You don't think that's why Xi Jinping is building out the island chain, the first island chain to defend that and stand off the carriers and all that? Of course he is. So, I hope we're adapting to that. So, anyway, I have probably talked long enough. I'm happy to stay around. I'd love to sign a book for you. I've only got 11. I'd like the Battle Digest Fredericksburg back, if you don't mind bringing that back up. But you can order yours, battledigest.com. I got plenty of business cards, so my website's on it. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Mike had to leave,
Thanks.
Yeah, Mike had to leave. I wanted to present the general with a challenge coin.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
welcome to our little group here.
Yeah, it's a great museum. I
Yeah.
got the nickel tour, and
Did
it's
you?
wonderful. Yeah.
Well, we can give you a $50 tour if you want.
Thanks, everyone.